Doug Ford just looked into a CNN camera and told Wolf Blitzer that the walls are closing in on the President of the United States, not a foreign adversary, not an opposition leader from another party, the Premier of Ontario, the leader of the province that shares the most economically integrated border with America on the planet, the man who governs 40% of Canada's GDP. He stood at Queen's Park on Monday morning, February 24, 2026, and called what Donald Trump is doing an economic war. He said, "Letty, no deal is better than a bad deal." And then he said something that should make every American who voted for tariffs stop and think. How can one person, one man create so much turmoil around the world? Not just here in Canada, but around the world. It is pretty staggering. So, I can't wait for the midterms. That last part is the part nobody is talking about. A Canadian premier just publicly endorsed the American midterm elections as the solution to the economic damage caused by the American president. He's not waiting for a negotiation. He's not hoping for a deal. He's running out the clock, and the calendar says he might be right. But this isn't about Doug Ford's press conference. This is about what he said next. Because when Ford appeared on CNN an hour later, he did something no Canadian leader has done in the entire 14 months of this trade war. He pointed the camera directly at the corruption. "Follow the money," he said. "Follow the money on the Gordie Howe Bridge." Why did Trump make this all of a sudden abrupt change? Let me show you what he's pointing at. Because what's happening with that bridge isn't a trade dispute. It's a federal investigation waiting to happen. And the Premier of Ontario just told 300 million Americans to look at it. The Gordie Howe International Bridge is a $5.7 billion crossing connecting Windsor, Ontario, to Detroit, Michigan. Canada paid for it. Canada built it. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security published a rule on February 7th, formally establishing it as an official port of entry, effective March 2nd. Customs officers were assigned. The ribbon cutting was being planned. And then on February 9th, Trump posted on Truth Social that he would not allow the bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated. Nobody in Washington understood where this came from. Trump had never mentioned the bridge before. His own administration had been working on the handover for months. His transportation department was finalizing logistics. And then in one social media post, he blew it all up. The New York Times reported why. Hours before that post, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick met privately in Washington with Matthew Moran. Moran is the billionaire CEO of the Detroit International Bridge Company. His family has owned and operated the Ambassador Bridge, the competing crossing between Detroit and Windsor for decades. Moran has donated over $600,000 to Trump's campaigns and the Republican Party since 2019. His family spent over $30 million in 2012 trying to kill the Gordie Howe project through a ballot initiative. They lost. They sued. They lost again. They filed free trade disputes. They lost every single time. And then they got a meeting with the Commerce Secretary. According to the Times, after that meeting, Lutnick called Trump by phone. Shortly after that call, Trump issued the threat. A billionaire donor walks into the Commerce Department, complains about a bridge that threatens his monopoly, and hours later, the President of the United States blocks its opening on social media. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee launched a formal investigation. Within days, Representative Robert Garcia called it flatly unacceptable and undeniably corrupt. Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan said the Moran family has used their money and influence for decades to enrich themselves at the expense of working-class Detroit. Democrats are demanding every document, every text message, every communication between Lutnick, Moran, the White House, and anyone connected to either bridge. The deadline for Lutnick's response was today, February 25th. The deadline for Moran is March 4th, and Ford just went on American national television and told millions of viewers to follow the money. That's the bridge story. Now let me show you the bomb that detonated in Washington while Ford was still on camera. 22 Senate Democrats led by Ron Wyden, Edward Markey, and Jeanne Shaheen introduced the Tariff Refund Act of 2026. The bill demands that U.S. Customs and Border Protection fully refund with interest every dollar collected under the EPA tariffs. The Supreme Court struck down on Friday $175 billion. That's the Penn-Wharton budget model estimate. EPA tariffs were generating more than $500 million per day in revenue before the ruling killed them. The bill gives customs 180 days. Small businesses go first. And Speaker Mike Johnson's response to whether Americans should get their money back, he told CNN he doesn't think so. Those are his words. A reporter asked him if the administration should refund over $130 billion that a court just declared was collected illegally. The Speaker of the House said no. He said the White House will sort that out. He said there's no playbook to follow, as if there's no playbook for returning money that doesn't belong to you. Simultaneously, Chuck Schumer announced that Senate Democrats will block any effort to Extend Trump's replacement 15% tariff past its 150-day statutory limit this summer. That is the kill switch built into Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Without congressional extension, the tariff self-destructs in late July. Schumer just welded the kill switch shut. Now zoom out. Because what Ford is doing isn't just talking to CNN. He's executing a strategy that makes Trump's position deteriorate by the hour. Ford urged every Canadian premier to travel south. Go to the American states that share borders with Canada. Talk to the governors, talk to the business owners, talk to the farmers, talk to the auto workers whose plants are bleeding because tariffs have made North American supply chains ungovernable. Ford announced he'll be making the trip himself in coming months, not to Washington, to the states, to the people whose representatives will face voters in November. And here's why that matters. More than any trade negotiation, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce President Daniel Tish went on CBC Radio the same morning and explained the structural shift Ford is exploiting. Trump hates the Supreme Court ruling because he loves unpredictability, Tish said. But business hates unpredictability. It has been destabilizing businesses in both the US and Canada. The ruling doesn't change much for Ontario businesses in the short term. The Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles are still standing. Those were never part of the EA case. They remain in full force today. The sectors that employ hundreds of thousands of Ontario workers got nothing from Friday's decision. But what the ruling did change is the architecture of leverage, and that's what Ford understands. Before Friday, Trump could threaten any country with unlimited tariffs by declaring an emergency that didn't exist. That power is gone, constitutionally annihilated by 6 justices, including 2 Trump nominated himself. The replacement weapon Section 122 is weaker in every dimension, lower maximum rate, built-in expiration, requires congressional approval to extend, and politically radioactive for any Republican who votes yes 9 weeks before midterms in districts where 60% of voters already oppose tariff policy. Ford is betting that this asymmetry grows every week and the data supports him. Food inflation in the United States just hit 7.3%, the highest in the G7. Coffee prices up nearly 30% year over year, beef up almost 19%. The Yale Budget Lab calculated that the average American household faces $600 in additional annual costs under the current tariff structure. If Congress extends the Section 122 tariffs, that number climbs to over 1,000. Every grocery receipt between now and November is a campaign ad that writes itself. And the bridge is the symbol that ties all of it together. A $6 billion infrastructure project that would ease congestion on the busiest commercial crossing in North America. A project that would create jobs on both sides of the border. A project that Canada paid for that Trump's own administration approved that was weeks away from opening. Killed by a Truth Social post written hours after a billionaire donor walked out of the Commerce Secretary's office. Ford called it out by name on CNN to Wolf Blitzer in front of an American audience. Follow the money. Why did he make this all of a sudden abrupt change? That question is now sitting on the desk of the House Oversight Committee. And the answer, depending on what those documents reveal, could turn a trade dispute into a corruption scandal with a bridge-shaped silhouette that every voter in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania can see from their kitchen window. Here's what this means for your life right now. Tomorrow morning, as of 12:01 a.m., every single EPA tariff code in the United States customs system goes dark, deactivated, replaced by Section 122 codes that have never been tested on live commerce. Customs brokers across North America are scrambling. No dry run, no test environment, no precedent. $3.5 billion in daily cross-border trade attempts to switch legal regimes overnight. If there are processing delays, shipment holds, or classification errors at the border tomorrow, those delays become supply chain disruptions within days and empty shelves within weeks. And the man who created that chaos will be delivering his State of the Union address tomorrow night, attempting to convince you that what just happened is a victory. Meanwhile, $175 billion in potentially illegal tariff collections sits in government accounts. 22 senators want it refunded. The Speaker of the House says no. The president who collected it says it'll be litigated for 2 years. And you, the person who paid higher prices on groceries, on cars, on building materials, on every imported good that touched an American port for the last 12 months, you are almost certainly never seeing that money back. Or the chain is too long. The mechanism doesn't exist. The companies that paid the tariffs might eventually recover something. The consumers who absorb the costs at the register will not. Ford knows this. He's not speaking to Canadians when he goes on CNN. He's speaking to the Americans who are paying for a trade war that a court just declared was waged with an illegal weapon. He's speaking to the Michigan auto workers whose plants are absorbing 25% tariffs on parts that cross the border 3 times before they become a finished vehicle. He's speaking to the New York small business owners who just watched a toy company called Learning Resources defeat the president in the Supreme Court because tariffs were threatening to bankrupt the family firm that makes counting bears for first graders. And he's speaking to the voters who will decide in 8 months whether the representatives who enabled this keep their jobs. Ford said something else on Monday that the headlines are burying. He said Trump still has a lot of tools. Section 232, the Cosmo Review in July. He's not pretending the danger is over. He's acknowledging that the fight is entering a new phase. A phase where the legal ground is narrower, the political cost is higher, the international credibility is shattered, and every week that passes without resolution is a week where businesses on both sides of the border bleed. But the difference between this phase and the last one is that the clock is no longer on Trump's side. 150 days late July. That's when the replacement tariff expires, the KSMA review opens, and the midterm campaign enters its final stretch. Every day between now and then is a day where Democrats can force votes, file refund legislation, investigate bridge corruption, and run ads showing grocery prices next to congressional voting records. Every day is a day where Ford and every Canadian premier can travel to American border states and tell voters what this trade war is actually costing them. Every day is a day where the leverage Trump thought he had continues to dissolve under the weight of a Supreme Court ruling that called his signature policy what it always was: illegal. Doug Ford is not a subtle politician. He's loud, he's blunt, he's a conservative who spent years trying to work with Trump. He went to Washington. He shook hands. He tried the diplomatic route. And today he stood in Queen's Park, looked into the cameras and said, "The walls are closing in." That's not a man making a prediction. That's a man reading the structural forces and stating the obvious. Courts saying no. Congress fracturing allies, building alternatives. The EU freezing deals, the bridge investigation widening, the refund bill gaining sponsors, the clock ticking down on every replacement weapon in the arsenal, and the question Ford posed on CNN, the one that should echo through every town hall and every kitchen table in America between now and November, is the simplest question anyone has asked in 14 months of economic chaos. How can one person, one man, create so much turmoil around the world? Pay attention to three things this week. First, tomorrow's customs transition. If the border chokes, you'll feel it within days at every store you walk into. Second, tomorrow night's State of the Union. Watch whether Trump addresses the $175 billion in refunds, the bridge investigation, or the Section 122 expiration. If he doesn't, that tells you he has no answer. Third, watch the Lutnick documents. The deadline was today. If those communications show what Democrats suspect they show, a billionaire buying a presidential decision to protect his toll revenue, the Gordie Howe Bridge becomes this administration's most visible symbol of corruption since the trade war began. Ford called it an economic war. He's right, but wars have turning points. And what happened this week? A Supreme Court rebuke, a refund bill for $175 billion, a corruption investigation into a bridge that Trump killed for a donor, and a Canadian premier going on American television to tell voters exactly where to look. That's not a turning point. That's the moment the tide became visible. The walls are closing in. The man inside them just doesn't know which way to run. If this analysis showed you what the headlines are hiding, subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me which story breaks first, the bridge investigation or the refund fight, because both are converging on the same midterm calendar and I'm watching every move.